You're listening to the Decentered Media Podcast with me, Rob Watson. Conversations about community media. Visit decentered.co.uk or follow on Instagram and Twitter at Decentered Media. Hello, it's Monday the 29th of December 2025. I'm Rob Watson and this is a Decentered Media podcast, and today I'm joined by Shumaila Jaffery, and I did say I'd get your name wrong because I always do. So I've not pronounced it right. Do you want to give us another go at that?
Sure. So I'm Shumaila Jaffery, and I am a journalist currently doing a PhD at the University of Leeds. I was born, raised, and educated, and also worked most of my life in Pakistan. I'm from an eastern city called Lahore. It's bordering India. It's the cultural capital of the country, and I have worked in different media kind of settings, or different kinds of structures or organizations. For the longest time, I've worked with the BBC World Service. My career started soon after 9/11, when my country, rather the entire region, was going through very turbulent times. So I've been at the front line of, conflicts and wars, and extremism has been one of the major themes of my reporting, and how the impact it had on our society. A lot of my work was focused on, reporting on how minorities were going through the persecution and targeting of minorities. I've covered everything, but I would say that has been one of the major themes. But I've also covered some major natural disasters. For instance, 2005 earthquake in Pakistan, in which more than 72,000 people died just in a fraction of a moment. And then some major floods like the recent 2022 floods, and in 2010 in Pakistan, in which millions of people were displaced. So it has been but also I'm interested in politics. So I've covered a lot of politics. I've traveled with Pakistan's, head of states, governors, and being an insider, that's also a very interesting. It was a great learning curve for me. So this has been my journalistic career, and now I'm doing research, and my topic is diaspora media ecology, focusing on UK on Leicester. Leicester is my case study, and I'll be looking into how diaspora media can be empowering. It can connect you to a community. It can give you a voice, but also it can alienate the communities as well. So there is always a danger and threat. So this is a brief introduction.
So we want to have a conversation about what is termed foundational media, which is, if I give it a kind of quick rule of thumb definition from my point of view, is thinking of civic, community, DIY, forms of social media as a kind of a resource for local people, communities to represent themselves, to explore issues, to debate, to have dialogue, to have deliberation, and to come to a view or to represent a view about who we are as people, but which doesn't need to be embedded into a state bureaucratic apparatus, public sector broadcasting like the BBC, or it doesn't have to be merely thrown out to a kind of free market, globalized free market. Somewhere in the middle, there's a kind of need for an accountable form of civic media. And so think of it like here in the UK, particularly, we pay for libraries, we subsidise theatres, we we have medical practices, doctors and hospitals and things. It's part of the social infrastructure, and we don't really think about our media in that way. But I think maybe just before we kind of maybe have a more detailed conversation about that, is really to draw on your experience and observations about how media has changed since, say, 2005, when you covered the earthquake in Pakistan. We here in the UK, it was a very limited number of channels. Now we've seen a globalized proliferation of media, and the age of scarcity for media is over, and it's a world of unending increase in media platforms. What's your journey through that process felt like as you've gone from working for the BBC World Service, a singular model of broadcasting in different forms, but now this kind of explosion of content?
Yeah, so it has been, of course, it seems like a very long time because things have moved so quickly. So just briefly, so when I started my career in Pakistan, we just had private media ownership. News channels were not allowed. So it was just the government. So there was just one TV news, television channel, and that was controlled by the state. So it's still controlled by the state. It is funded by it has been created on the model of the BBC. It is funded by the public, but it works as a mouthpiece of the sitting government. So no matter who is in power, whether it's the military dictator or it's the party on the left or the right, the function is same. So then I switched, and then a few years later, private media ownership was allowed. So I worked in a news channel, which you were talking about, the mainstream media, which is totally commercial, owned by a business tycoon. So I was really happy, and it was a very secure job at the state broadcaster, but I thought, no, I can't. It was so suffocating, editorial restrictions. And I quit the job, and I thought I'll be working in an ideal environment. But then I realized after a few working in that organization, after a few months, that they were red lines, because the channel was basically, in a way, is a tool to secure the tycoons' business and political interests. And then finally, I get to the BBC. The BBC World Service again, it's a top-down kind of a structure, but the World Service is slightly different from how the BBC is here in the UK. So in a way, it was like, okay, let's. Instead of which they still do, they send the reporters, which is correspondents, BBC correspondents from the UK. They would depute them to different countries all over the world. But then they have these language services. So in that way, it is a way of giving local voices, local reporters, an opportunity to tell their stories. So initially what was happening was that there would be stories, but even if it comes to reporting for BBC World Service or English outlets, so what those correspondents would do was that they would take the material from the local reporter, their stories, their contacts and everything, and they would convert it into English, and then they are the ones who would be reporting it for global outlets, for news channel here. And that was, quite, ethically and morally, of course, extractive, and, people were not happy, World Service reporters. Then the BBC started a program of bilingual reporters. So, I was one of the initial, first or second batch of bilingual reporters. So then not as much opportunity, but then doors were open for us. So it's a completely different model. Now coming to your question about how it has changed, I think my kind of problem with this current model is that it is so dependent on clicks and hits and views. And every single day now in our newsroom, before I left the BBC last year for my PhD, every single day in the morning, there will be a meeting in which numbers would be discussed. And every single kind of journalist who has nothing to do with, they are reporters, they work in the field, but they are also, be in that meeting, and numbers would be discussed, that, which story performed the best, which story performed the worst, what happened where, what were the comments on. So it became for me, and at one point it became so kind of, I don't know, daunting and overwhelming. And I thought it is, it is detrimental in a way that I can't do my work. I can't focus on my journalistic work, on my story, thinking about which angle should I take, thinking about my visuals, or people that I want to include in my voices, I want to include in my story. It's the entire focus is on how can you maximize the numbers. So I think that has been one of the most for me was quite disappointing as a journalist. And Now, in a way, I understand. I come from a country where minority groups, they did not have access to, their voices were, marginalized, always on peripheries. In a way, this current model of, DIY and social media and platform, it has empowered, you know, many communities around the world. But at the same time, there is no gatekeeping, and I'm not, gatekeeping not in a negative sense, but in a positive sense, where there are norms, where there are responsibilities, editorial responsibility. It has become like, and now, with monetization, so monetization has made it worse, I think. Rage has become a commodity, and we see that it's selling, and how communities are being polarized. So now there are no kind of common narratives, common, civic values, or shared, stories. So in one way, talking about foundational media, where, it is kind of, I feel it is so essential, because I think it is giving power to the communities to tell the stories, because they know what issues are important to them. I don't think ever that can a person who has come from another city or another country, no matter how much help they can have translators and producers, they do not understand the story, the context, the way a local journalist can. But it's also about making those in power accountable, so your issues. And in a way, to me, this concept of foundational media is, it helps people navigate their everyday life. So it's about, there are services. So there's a social contract between a government and its citizens, and it's the government's responsibility that it provides its citizens some basic facilities, like, access to health and education, clean drinking water and energy and dignity. But who would make them accountable? Now, in this top-down model, it's not possible. It's a structural flaw. It's not anybody's fault. But this foundational media, where people have resourcing and access, and media literacy is also very important, I think, and resources, they can tell their stories. They can ensure that citizens have access to those services promised in the social contract, and they can make governments accountable. So I think these two, creating shared point of references, shared values, it has become so important because of this polarization, where every single, community, a group of people, they have their own media, and it is open to manipulation by non-state actors, hostile states, this group and that group, and there are individuals who are now selling your rage and your attention on social media and making money out of it. So I think with this concept of foundational media, I think media literacy is also embedded with this concept, where you just don't give them funding, or the government, it's not just facilitating them through regulation or giving them resources, but also this general awareness, and giving them this education and training of how they can tell their own stories, and generally, this awareness among communities, that what is media, how stories are made, what's happening behind the scenes, behind the camera. So that understanding, I think, can can also be very helpful. And I'm very, in a way, I mean, because of my own research, polarization and disinformation and these things like bother me a lot. And I think foundational media it can be a great solution to all these challenges.
I mean, this is the topic of 10 PhDs and 1,000 podcasts. So we're only going to scratch the surface, and many podcasts will follow, we hope, and many discussions about a number of these issues. I think one of the framing things that is kind of, everything you just said, I absolutely fully understand. But where I'm kind of a bit concerned is how do we describe this? It's, if you like, the framework that we use to analyze the problem, so and account for things. And I'm by disposition a pragmatist in terms of the formal theoretical sense of a pragmatist, kind of Dewey and James and those kind of thinkers, and just the notion that it has to come from within. Human interaction is the space that we have to sort our problems out. They don't come from outside of human experience; they come from within human experience. So we've got to do the work to fix these problems and to improve them and to value what works well. But then also, so that means that says that there isn't an ideological framework around this, as if
No.
ideology is somehow a separate phenomenon that exists.
Yeah. It's functionality of, it's not about, format, or it's not about platforms or technology. It is about, I think, functionality of, what is the function of media.
And it's the function of interpersonal, intercultural, social relations,
Yeah.
and how they're developed and supported, and they depend on forms of communication, whether it's the written word, the printed page, the printed newspaper, the radio or television broadcast.
Yeah.
Each of those changes the way that we interact and understand each other, but they construct they provide a space in which we interact. They facilitate that interaction. What we can't ascribe to them is somehow a kind of almost spiritual or magical power which is separate from human functionality. So that's that's a very good way of painting a simple image of what pragmatism kind of calls for. So therefore means I find it kind of, sometimes it goes against there's I suppose in academic circles, ideology still reigns supreme, and that there is a search for some kind of ism. Colonial, I can't even say the word colonialism, capitalism, whatever whatever there is an explanation that says this is how the world is structured, and that if we only deal with that ism, then we're going to deal with the problem. And actually, you find that you deal with the ism and you're left with as many other problems that you just not addressed at the same time. So I tend to not want to take what we might, in blunt terms, call an ideological view. And I know there's a lot of other philosophical discussions about what that means. So I look at media from the point of view as functionality, civic engagement, practice, kind of learnt experience, lived experience, and contingency based on where you are, how you engage and what you do. So looking for a solution to, if you like, it becomes then harder to paint a picture. So one of the things that you described is the difference between the media institutions that you've worked in as one might call it a capitalistic system where there is a billionaire proprietor, and this is an easy thing that people throw around, and a state control system. And it's like, and what we miss is the space in the middle of that, to figure out and do something where we can use the tools that we've got in order to be able to create something. So that's kind of where I think foundational media fits in.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, just in terms of trying to formulate this into a question for us to both kind of talk about is what from your experience and having been on lots of different vantage points and in lots of different intersectional points where things are fed through this process. What's your concern about the way our media systems are thought of at the moment? What motivates you? You said about misinformation and disinformation really worry you. So
Yeah.
why does that worry you? What is it about the present system that we operate with that you think has to be addressed?
I think I'm most worried about polarization. It's ripping countries, societies, and communities apart, and there is no end to it. This division and further division and further division and further division and hate and a lot of negative energy, and it seems that the entire world is in some sort of a crisis. It is in a crisis. So it's, sometimes you feel, okay, maybe sometimes I feel like maybe I'm consuming too much news. It's my research, it's my work, I'm a journalist. So of course but I don't think it's like, you will close your eyes and the problem will not disappear. So it's almost that. And I think, again, it's not just, I totally agree with you that we should not be thinking about media in within ideological framework. And I think this is what is happening. There are now communities are divided on ideological. Every person has a different ideology, and there are culture wars. And but I think, when we talk about foundational media, it is one of so the media system is always going to be a hybrid system. It's not going to be like, just foundational media. I can see and I appreciate the role of BBC as a national public broadcaster. So at the national level, there needs to be a broadcaster like a BBC. It's not a perfect organization. I know in the past few years there've been, several controversies, but I can, from my own experience, I can tell that it is an asset. It is the most trusted news broadcaster in the world. So I see the role of the BBC, but the BBC cannot be a replacement of community media. I understand that they have a kind of footprint across the UK, and in the past few years they've been trying to make more effort. They have moved operations out of London so they can be seen, and more visibility, more inclusivity in terms of accents and faces, and they've been trying to make an effort. But I still feel that they cannot be a replacement of a community media, foundational media. What they can do is, through their infrastructure, they can support and help and nurture community media, but they cannot be a replacement. So the social media will always remain there. So people, if they are into ideologies or something, they can get those ideologies from whatever media or influencers they are following on the internet. There needs to be a national broadcaster. But what is missing is, and what needs more focus at the moment is, I think, more support for foundational media, community media, which can be supported and sustained. And it's very important that they have like stable support systems, stable funding, and they can be supported, like they can be embedded within the social infrastructure of local governments. So some funding can come from the government, for support for regulation, support for legal kind of matters, for making processes easier, procurement, training. That kind of support can come from the government, but also community can come forward. It can be funded by local communities, local businesses, or there can be other different models of cooperatives and trusts, and where people can have shares within an entity. And so they can be different model. But what is important is that they should be supported. The support should be stable, and it should be kind of, so over the time you can see the difference. It's not that there's one media outlet and it is gone because it could not sustain itself after a few months or a couple of years, and then it's gone. And also, it is very important that it is place based. So place based, it is from the community, within the community, no matter how small that setup is. It needs to be place-based, rooted in the community that they are representing, because this has become, the entire kind of information world has become so shady. There are people sitting in their in their uh, in their basements in different countries, other countries, and there are multiple incidents. Even very recently, they've been recently there was this attack in Bondi where, and the person, the name of the person, and there was a Pakistani guy and somebody, a person who was Nigerian and was probably, or a Cambodian, and he was based in Italy or some other European country. He took the picture of a person with the same name but a different man, and published it and said, this is the killer and he's a Pakistani. And so you see, that's it's a really dark world out there. So it's very important, the people, it's place-based media, the journalists are from the community, people know them, and they are rooted in that community, so they know the community, they understand how they navigate their, through everyday life, and they understand what are the issues and problems. And it's not only that, in times of crisis. So the problem with top-down approach or media like the BBC is that mostly local communities are projected, are represented when there is a crisis, or as a number, or a statistic, they are reflected. So I think that's where more efforts or more resources should be put in.
There's I mean, first of all, just caveat what I said about ideology per se, I think is always the word that we should add, is that yes, there are useful critiques of that take an ideological view, but I just don't think it should be a totalizing critique. It's, it offers where it's valid, and it offers insight and potential for recognition of whatever problems we're dealing with, then it should be looked at and used and valued. But you're right. One of the things it's this notion of accountability. Where does accountability sit? And there seems to be in the media literacies discussion and frameworks that for some reason, when it comes to media, people are not thought to be able to take responsibility. So the example that you give of the misinformation of somebody posting online a spurious picture, claiming it was a terrorist, and it wasn't anything to do with that person. That's because there's a lack. That person has done that on the basis of either malicious intent, laziness, or stupidity, which it could be either of those factors. Most likely, it's malicious. But there's no accountability when you have this social media free for all, and the globalized media where you can sit in, the image of the basement warrior, sitting at their keyboard, fueling indignation because it creates clicks and it's promoted by the algorithms. If we've got nothing to counter that, and that local accountability where you live in the same town, you visit the same shops and businesses, you get the same buses, your children go to the same schools, that seems to have kind of been lost from as a foundational principle that's important, that it's a shared experience. And I worry with the BBC's approach, they call it the digital first strategy, where they've actually pulled apart a lot of what BBC Local Radio used to do, which was place-based, and they've gone to digital, and it creates a lot of rubbish. It's just, kind of a lot of it is slop, is the phrase that's used online. It's just meaningless stuff, which is just kind of like, it's defined as being local because somebody says you can get these varieties of packets of crisps in this local shop here, and they might mention 2 or 3 shops, and that's somehow to make it locally relevant, but it's still an article about crisps. It's not about anything significant. It's like, and it's not tied in with anything else. And that kind of evaporation of place-based, lived, shared lives is the danger, that we pull that apart and we let that vanish and just evaporate, and that creates the space and the gap for the manipulators and the exploiters and the nefarious, malign intended agents to step in. So you can't. It's all very well having a strategy for keeping people safe online from the center and the top down. But if people aren't empowered to fill that space with their own content in an accountable manner, in a trusted and truthful manner, then you lose the it doesn't matter what you do from the center. It doesn't matter what you do from the top. It will be wasted energy because there's nobody there to put anything as an alternative into practice. And one of the things I'll just finish with this point is in a way that a lot of people kind of, when we think about the BBC and the charter renewal, is the discussion that's going to be taking place. And I'll put a link in for the public consultation about charter renewal. Is that, it's like we're not. I use the phrase, which was fashionable a couple of years ago, from after the pandemic, was building back from the middle. And it's almost as if we're not having that conversation about what is the infrastructure in the middle that enables people to participate in civic life, in community life, and to have fulfilling, creative, confident lives. What is it we need to put in place, and how can we use our media as part of that? What do you think? What would you say? How do we get that argument across to people?
So see, there is talking about digital first strategy, and the focus shifted on visual elements of hooking people, so people stay and click, and it's not about if the content is useful for a community or not. So for me, one kind of my year of thinking about media, especially community media, is not that is that if it is useful for a community or not. So if it is talking about raising the issues, and again sharing their experiences, reflecting their lives, then I think it because I think BBC has been forced into thinking about audiences and numbers, and because this is something that what everybody else was doing, and to some extent this is also a relevant kind of discussion, is that if people are not watching you, then what is the point of you putting out this content, putting so much content out there if people are not consuming it. So you have to compete for attention, because otherwise other media organization and platforms, they are investing so much into it that BBC will be abandoned by the audiences. So there is also that concern. But then you kind of completely lose the. But then if you're totally focused on hooking in people on visuals, so visuals should be extremely strong. Then of course, still BBC sometimes they do like good journalism, good investigative stories. So I'm not saying that it's all kind of the quality is gone. No, that's not the case. But if we are talking about domestically, about local communities in the UK, and I think these are the communities that fund the BBC, then they need to kind of see that how useful that the BBC is for them and for their kind of are their problems and challenges and everyday experiences reflected in that media. So I think usefulness, if it is useful, if it is beneficial,
and that implies a different metric or different yardstick to measure this purpose by, or through, or with. And I was thinking, one of the things, we don't ask our libraries to. I mean, maybe we do. Maybe this is part of the problem, is that we ask our libraries to be places of entertainment rather than places of learning. It's like they fulfill a multiple purpose. I mean, here in Leicester, the libraries are specifically also providing warm spaces for people to cope with and deal with the cost of living crisis, where heating bills and libraries can play. And okay, if that invites people in, and they can also access books and other media resources and podcasts and things to be able to keep warm as well. Well, that's a social purpose. So, but the measurement indicators that we use are very much more about the transfer of information, being a hub for information. We don't put that same responsibility on our public service media, which is, after all, paid for by taxpayers. Effectively, you can't choose not to. It's very difficult not to pay your BBC license fee. So that connection between purpose and provision is something which is kind of like, well, we are we using the wrong measurement indicators, the wrong yardstick, and should we, if we were going to change that, what would you, based on how you've seen it work internally and externally, uh, what kind of things do you think we should be measuring as a kind of an outcome of a public purpose type of media?
So I think if talking about top-down model, I think it's really impossible. Again, it's a structural kind of issue that you cannot represent every single community. There are hundreds of dozens and dozens of communities, up and down the country. It's impossible. That's why, it is important to have this hybrid media environment where BBC, it has its role, but then we need to have a stronger community media, foundational media, that can give them also platform, a voice, a relatability also, I think, and that can prioritize the stories of the communities. Otherwise, I've worked for the organization. It's not that they are not dealing with the there, but there are so many things happening all the time at the national level and in international level, that it's really every single minute and second you have to kind of fight for and save. That's how valuable BBC's airtime is. So for me, I think it's coming back to that we need to have a stronger community media. There should be more support for community media and foundational media. And I think having a mix of, like, not just one kind of media, but a mix of a hybrid media system, I think that can be helpful for.
I don't want this to be just a discussion of the
Yeah.
BBC, but the BBC is the main topic of interest given the controversy that's occurred over the last few months, and then also because of the level of funding it gets and its role within as a state provider, if you like, or non-state provider, is the does it do too, are we expecting too much? I mean, we're expecting the BBC to be an international globalized media corporation that can compete with Netflix and Amazon and Apple and all of those other corporations, as well as providing local news to I'll use a phrase, a granny here, here in the back streets of Leicester, in Gujarati, relevant to a Gujarati speaking granny in Leicester. It's like, are we just expecting too much of this? And if we're going to have to prioritize, and other organizations are supported and invested in. I mean, we don't have a national library service in the UK. We have local authorities have the legal requirements to provide library services. We don't have. We do have a national health service. And one of the interesting things about the national health service, the decision was taken in the 1940s, following the Beveridge report, and it was agreed in 1945, and the new Labour government came in to create a national health service because that was the best way to achieve the outcomes. Beveridge actually wrote another report where he talked about civic infrastructure and a dispersed model. And it's never really, in the UK, it's kind of like we stuck with the national centralized organization because that was the best way to process information at the time. Now we've gone through an information revolution, and I can access as much information now with AI as anybody else. I can do the job of Whitehall better than the Whitehall can do it, than the central government can do it, because we're in an information network, a dispersed network now, rather than it being having to be centralized in one place and that top down place applying. So the playing field, if you like, is a different field now. It's changed. We thought we were playing football, soccer, and we're not. We're playing, cricket or basketball. Something has changed, but the people running the game maybe haven't kind of caught up with that and thought that they're going to have to change what they do as well.
Well, yeah, I think, and I'll come back to this point. And I think it's not the people who are running the BBC, but also people who are funding the BBC and their expectations. So, but you see, what amazes me is that people in this country do not understand that the international standing of the BBC. They don't. And over the years, there have been, I would say, like organized systemic attacks on these organizations from left, right, and center. And one time, a few years ago, I was in London for my, women leadership development program, and there were kind of a couple of other women journalists, somebody from Iraq and India and different countries. So it's a great organization, the BBC. So, and we were talking about how in every single country the authorities were going after the BBC because of its journalism, because, questioning those in power, accountability, standing up for human rights. So it was amazing. And in journalism, we say if those in power are coming after you, it means you are doing something right. So international people within this country, they do not have any clue of the international standing or the asset or the soft power that the BBC, the BBC is and has and is for the UK. And I think that in some sometimes I just jokingly say that this country, after end of colonialism, it's becoming smaller and smaller and smaller. It's a small country. I mean, in terms of kind of area, it's a small country. In terms of also international influence, because now other countries in global south, they are rising, they have bigger populations, bigger economies, so the influence is also kind of shrinking. So the BBC is still so powerful that one language service of the BBC can sometimes be more powerful or more influential than the government of this country. So, a small service can be more powerful. But within kind of the UK, people do not have any kind of any idea of what the BBC World Service is. They are angry with the BBC and they feel that the BBC has somehow failed them. They, for many years, they could not see themselves. It was not relatable because it was, sitting in London, very multicultural, and I think that was, these grievances were genuine grievances. But then they've been local and international actors, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist, who do not like the BBC because of their own political agendas. They've been populist leaders and, dictators. And many times people in this country would not know that what is happening. In the recent case, they know because, of course, it's a huge news. It's a big news. But otherwise, they would not even know that who is coming after the BBC. But there are many people who do not like the BBC. And they've been... it's systematically, they've been over the years, there've been this propaganda and dressing down and criticism. I don't know, and I'm not saying, and I'm not trivializing of real, genuine grievances of the people, but thinking about, I stayed in the BBC for 12 years. Not a single day there was, there was not a single day where you would feel you're stable, because it is changing all the time. It is changing, reinventing itself. They are improving the whatever, I'm not saying that they were making the best decisions, but all the time there is this willingness to change, their willingness to serve people better, the license fee payers. But they are always trying to do that. Do they always get it right? Well, probably they don't. But I think that sometimes BBC get a lot of flack from all sides. Nobody's happy. It is a great institution. I still believe, not because I've worked there, but I've worked in different and I come from a country where I know what is censorship and what it feels like working in a state broadcaster. People are paying for that organization, but it works for publicity of the sitting government. So I think that it is also about expectations of people that. And sometimes they are not clear. So they think that whatever they are facing, if there is cost of living crisis, somehow politicians are responsible for it, but somehow the BBC is also responsible for it. Because they see it as part of establishment, probably. So I think I'm not saying that people should not change. Living with realities, reinventing itself, I think is very, very important. leaner, I mean, think financially more viable, more productive, and they should find a way to kind of keep people in the, people who fund the BBC. They should try to keep them happy, but also thinking about that. How many things can the BBC do?
I think
That's a very good question.
that there's a foundational question, isn't there, or foundational principle, which is about trust and how do you
Yeah.
engender and build trust, and trust has to be constantly won.
Yeah.
And also, one of the things that I think has changed in which I didn't think would happen, but it's happened in British universities, and it's kind of could arguably be put down to the introduction of the market mechanism within formerly uh, formerly non-marketized institutions. So the BBC was asked to chase the global marketplace to raise revenue. So it goes after wealthy, left-leaning supporters in Australia and America for BBC News to capture an audience there to bring some money back to the UK. The universities chased the global marketplace, bringing in Chinese, Nigerian students from around the world. And when the economics shifts and changes, you're left with a big gap in your finances, and you can't sustain it. But also, the notion of trust is what you've done is you've turned away from your core purpose, which is to serve the needs of British citizens who pay for the license fee. And within that, there's a kind of a management class. This is where the conspiracy theory, I think, is kind of perhaps justified, is that there is an elite. They call it an elite. Don't like the language, but there is a group of people who are running our institutions who are have forgotten what public service means, or have an idea of what public service is, which is actually different from what the public thinks it is. So the Brexit debate in the UK was a prime example that the shock and consternation, and I was of that opinion. I voted to remain, and it's like kind of the majority vote was to leave, but the BBC kind of didn't reflect that, how evenly balanced that was. So something was not right about the structural way that and an organisation. And we've seen it on a number of fronts, which came out in the Michael Powell report about the way that structurally the BBC handles internal dissent, internal differences of opinion, and other organizations handle questions about the validity of the project, because it becomes wrapped in a kind of managerialism that becomes a kind of a self-defined bubble that listen to Tim Davie when he was, he's still Director General. He's not been replaced yet, but he is on his way out. And when you hear him talk, the language is very much that very slick, managerial. He is the organization. He's the proxy for the organization. Everything is about him. It's his team. It's his staff. Everything is done through him. So therefore, he can expect for the public to take against him, I suppose, in reality. But we don't. It's autocratic, and we live in a democracy, but there's no democratic structures within our media which allow for debate and discussion and differences of opinion. And if you don't agree with the BBC and what they do locally, say here, in a town in the UK. How easy is it for you to set up an alternative media provider? It's incredibly difficult to do that. Setting up a radio station, you have to go through lots of experience doing this. You have to go through lots of hoops. You have to bring people together. You have to train people up. There has to be an expectation, and an expectation of what is trying to be. People are trying to achieve and do. It's not easy to do that from a stand and start. But there is a lot of dissatisfaction. I suppose to draw this kind of set of thoughts to a point, to a thread, is to say, how can we use and what can we do to build and make it easier for people to establish that pluralistic set of other civic-based, community-based media opportunities that would not replace, but counterbalance the industrialized, state-based, commercial, outright international commercial-based organizations? What do we put in place to kind of, in the same way that we fund libraries, in the same way that we fund local art galleries, what is it that we need to put in place, local art cinemas, that will ensure that we've got media platforms, newspapers, radio stations, TV networks, whatever it is, if it's online on YouTube channels, that have that sense of accountability, trust, that purpose of serving people's needs at the forefront.
Yeah. So it's you see, I'm not again an authority on the BBC, just as a journalist and from my own lens and my own experiences. But I feel that that's the solution, because because BBC it's a national kind of broadcaster, and no matter, I'm not saying, I mean, they should do better, they should again try to, and they keep, I don't know, but what happens to what, all the time they're doing research, commissioning research on audiences and how they can serve the public better, and then I don't know what happens and why there's a gap.
Do you believe any? I don't believe a word of that research. Everybody I speak, I mean, this might just be my experience, but everybody I speak to says they don't watch the BBC. They don't like it. They don't agree with it. Maybe it's my circle of friends, maybe it's something, they're telling me I want to know.
And one from the BBC. And again, I'm not, an advocate or anything, but I've been kind of to different meetings, and they have these meetings with, so at one time, so what they would do is that they would have meetings with audiences from in different smaller cities and communities, and then they would ask them question, and they said that many people consume the BBC, but they do not even notice that they are consuming a product of the BBC. So that's their kind of counter argument. But I'm saying that BBC, it's national, it's highly likely that it would always kind of feel and seem distant and elite. And it's to some extent, again, I don't know really. I was part of World Service. I've worked out of London also. I've done a couple of, attachments. But, I'm not claiming I'm an authority in an organization from my own experiences. Of course, there is also, this thing that where people say, there are many journalists who are top journalists who are educated in private schools. So that kind of impression of elitism is, of course, it's not that it's baseless. There is, some reality to it, of course. So, but in my view, again, it's good to have, the word that you use, more plural kind of communication system, of hybrid or not hybrid, but plural, where you have this social media also, you have this national broadcaster, but also a strong community media. The government should in each, and I think BBC can support that community media through its expertise and infrastructure all across the country. But I think that if the way we kind of look at foundational media and the role that we have just discussed, thinking that BBC would ever be able to do that, it seems to me kind of, I don't know. I mean, but it's really kind of, it seems it's not closer to reality. I mean, or it's really difficult. I don't know.
I think. I mean, I one of the reasons I really like podcasts, and I really like doing podcasts as well as listening to podcasts, is it enables you to do your thinking out loud. And it's like your thoughts develop as you go through a good conversation. And I think we've been having a good conversation. And I've just noted down that, I mean, there's a I think it's Raymond Williams said to democratize our media, we need to deprofessionalize it. And there's an awful lot of status wrapped up in being professionalized media, kind of people who work in the media, they get paid well, that kind of thing. And actually, most of what can be passed off as media, local news reports, can all be done by ordinary members of the community. It's very similar. The technology's changed. We have amazing resources in our smartphones, our mobile phones. We can do this now. We can share things. If sharing images on a WhatsApp group for my neighborhood street is worried about people dropping litter and fly tipping. So we share videos and we post them up and we share them. Well, that's media. That's a form of engagement using media.
Yeah.
People don't need to be taught, or people don't need to be super professional in order to do that. There's an advantage that comes from it, but it's not a necessity anymore. There's no
No,
magic behind
no,
it.
it's
Where,
not.
where, go
Sorry.
on.
So it's not that expensive also. Think about, when we used to in early days television, it was so expensive. Every
Yeah.
single kind of DVC cassette, or before that, I don't know, there were different other formats, VHS, Umatic, and I don't know, Beta, or so
Yeah,
the
you take a
equipment was,
photograph and you had to wait a week to get a print back, or go to
yes,
a dark room, and we it's the world is different.
it's
The
different.
the question I've got, and I think this is where we can think about future conversations and discussions, is what are the lessons from citizens media or community media that and this is my personal sense of frustration, I suppose, is that people aren't listening or going out of their way to find out what the lessons are, but also that colleagues in the UK are not telling people, or we're not coming together robustly or coherently enough to actually and kind of methodically enough to say these are the lessons from citizens journalism, news reporting, whatever you call that, whatever that works out as. Are we doing enough to explain what the benefits are of this pluralistic, distributed, deprofessionalized approach in a world of of media, globalized media. What's the word we're looking? We need plenty. It's like what are the lessons from that we need to say this is a good way of doing things. These are this is what difference it makes, and it's the positive difference it makes, as well as defending ourselves from the negative and the kind of the malicious use of media.
And I think one factor is also, monetization on social media. So people who know, it's not that people now do not know, because it has become so, appearing on television used to be like, lighting, and you have to look a certain way, and the studio and everything. Now, it's, authenticity. So you can do anything. It has become kind of straightforward. But then people who can do, they are trying to create their own channels and make money out of it. I think that's also one aspect. I'm not saying that getting licenses or starting a media venture is it's simple and easy. But I think that's also, monetization is also one of the factors. The second thing is, I think, a political will. So the government now, when it's not as expensive as it used to be, it's not as difficult as it's used to be. So you can teach a few tips and tricks to people, and they are good to go. So then there needs to be more kind of, the government should use the opportunity, and I think that there needs to be more political will. But about from professionalizing to, you use the word unprofessionalized, or yeah,
Deprofessionalized, yeah.
deprofessionalized. So I think that there should be at least some bit of professionalism,
Oh
not
yeah,
the
yeah,
way
yeah,
you look, but
absolutely.
in
Yeah,
terms
a
of
large part, yes.
values and ethics and fact checking, and that
Well, it's
kind of
about it's about specialism and generalism. There are some
journalism.
areas where
Yeah,
I don't want to go to a deprofessionalized
yeah.
cardiac surgeon when I when I go to get my chest pains examined. I don't want the greengrocer brought in, but
Yes,
when I go to the greengrocer, I want to know that they know a broad range of knowledge about fruits and
yes,
vegetables. And it's what's appropriate. But the difference is recognizing that it's part of an ecosystem. And I think one of the things that we've maybe uh, done is to segment these systems. Again, critical of systems thinking, or only looking at things as parallel systems or related systems, when actually we should be looking at things more holistically. So if we want an educated population who can deal with the challenges of misinformation, we have to improve the education process. But media, for the frustration I have, and I kind of need to find a way to express this in a more kind of a call to arms, if you like, a manifesto, if you like, is to say that media is it's the forgotten tool It's like we've got this toolkit here that we can use, which is about civic participation using media to look at health, well-being, civic responsibility, uh, deliberation and debate about contentious issues in society, all of that kind of stuff. But we've locked that cupboard away and said only the professionals can use this, only the government can use this tool, only the commercial operators can use this tool. And that toolkit is waiting to be explored by other people. But the people who locked it away don't understand that everybody else has now gone out and bought smartphones, and they're doing stuff regardless of what this gatekeeper who controls the toolkit thinks that should be happening. And the world out there is something completely different. And that's the interesting tension with these things. It's going to happen anyway. So we've got to make it happen in a way which is beneficial to as many people as possible, I suppose, and future generations.
Yes,
and not
and
just trying to stand.
a little bit rewarding for those who get involved in foundational media, community media, because it's somebody, if they can make money by monetizing their content on YouTube, it has become so simple, or writing tweets or making TikTok videos. So if they are doing something which is for public service in a way, so that they should also, the process should somehow in some shape or form also reward them in some way. I think why would there should be some motivation for people for doing this work.
Otherwise, we'll just let AI do it all, and we'll all be dissatisfied permanently. So let's finish off with what are you looking forward to then about the research that you're going to be doing, and the kind of work that you've got in lined up for the next 12 months?
So I think that I am looking forward to my attachment with Decentered Media, and of course, I'm very. There are mixed feelings of me coming to Leicester. It's a city my research is centered on, and I've been reading about it. Excited, but also, I have these fears if people would trust me, if I will be able to get, they would, I will be able to talk to them and interview them for my research. But also, I have some plans of, my commitment with media literacy. So when I'll be there, I'm also looking forward to, designing and want to deliver a couple of media literacy workshops. And yes, so it's a second year after coming back from Leicester. This year, probably I will give a couple of talks, maybe write a paper and start analyzing my data if I'm able to get some good data from Leicester. So,
well, I hope it's going to include us doing a few more podcasts.
Yes.
Because I will include another couple of colleagues. I'm sure a colleague, John Coster, will always be interested in, because he's doing the opposite in a project in Nigeria.
Yes, I'm following him on LinkedIn.
Yes, taking his skills there to support media. So it's a two-way process. And I think there's an awful lot that we can learn from, as you say, the kind of, we in the UK we think of the BBC in a way which we kind of take it for granted. Yes. And interaction and talking to colleagues and internationally, it's a two-way street, and we can learn a lot from how and why people create and support their own foundational media in different forms and in different ways. Is there any last thoughts that you want to add or that we've not covered? And what's the best way for people to, if they want to follow up with you? Is your LinkedIn profile probably the best to?
Yes, so I'm on LinkedIn at Shumaila Jaffery. So that's same spelling, SHUMAILA JAFFERY. I'll be also sending a blog so that you can post on the website. So it will include my contact details. Yes, and I'm looking forward to come and visit and explore Leicester. And you have told me that it has amazing South Asian food. So looking forward to kind of enjoying that.
It has something from everywhere, I think, is the best way to describe Leicester. So you've been listening to a Decentered Media podcast, and thank you very much, Shumaila. That's just I got totally engrossed in the conversation there, which is always good. If you want to support Decentered Media, go to decentered.co.uk. We are on the social media feeds, Blue Sky, X. I think I post out on LinkedIn. And we have a Patreon account, which you can sign up and support the work that we do. It helps keep the podcast occasionally coming out. But until next time, thank you very much. You've been listening to the Decentered Media Podcast with me, Rob Watson. To find out more, go to decentered.co.uk or follow on Twitter and Instagram @Decentered Media.